6:01. And today's date is January 4th. We, the Planning and Zoning Commission, call this meeting to order on the 4th, 2022. Happy New Year. Dave, are there any citizens with business not scheduled on the agenda who would like to speak at this time?
No, sir. If you would like to speak during the public hearing portion of it, since that's what you were here for, certainly feel free.
Okay. Moving on the agenda, item number 1. Consideration of possible action regarding approval of December 7th, 2021 regular meeting minutes.
I move to approve the minutes for December 7th meeting.
Second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Aye. The motion passes. Okay, moving on. Item number 2. Convene into a public hearing regarding the rezoning request for A, Hills of Town Creek, Section 5, from B commercial to R1 single-family residential, and item B, 14855 North Liberty Street, Montgomery, Texas, from R1 single-family residential to B commercial.
I'll wait a quick introduction to the public hearing. You guys are in the public hearing, and if you would just announce the time.
Yes, the time is now 6:04, and we're in public hearing.
Just as a way of introduction on this, again, we have 2 rezoning requests which do require public hearings. One of these is for Hills of Town Creek, Section 5, the other is for a small property on 149. In the map that I made for the Hills of Town Creek, Section 5, I made a note on there that showed where what the city's always called our future water plant site. So just as a reference, primarily the city council to know what we're talking about. And I believe that note garnered as much interest as anything because, folks, they received a letter and saw a map that said future water plant site. And so I talked to Councilman Sanford and said, yeah, I'm getting a lot of calls about this future water plant site. What's going on? And the lesson was, again, a small note that really wasn't meant to convey anything about a water plant necessarily, did, again, end up, being received, and, it did have some interest. I spoke to the gentleman here earlier about, and I believe, do you live in Hills of Town Creek?
I sure do.
So I'm putting you on the spot. We're right in the public hearing for the rezoning request, and I was explaining to them about a note that I had added to the map that said future water plant site that I think got a lot of attention.
Yeah, I did.
Yes. Just by way of explanation on that, to talk a little bit both to the commission and to you guys about the future water plant site. So the city about 10 years ago or so acquired that small piece of property that we knew in theory and in concept that our existing water plants were on the east side of the city and that much of the growth that we would experience would happen on the west side of the city. So what that piece of property became for us was a placeholder that said we don't have the need today and we don't know what it would look like because it's all driven by what the development happens and how development happens. But the city said we know we need something on the west side of town, and right now that is our placeholder for it. There are no plans. I would expect those plans to start to take shape over the next 18 to 24 months. Again, based on the growth that we're seeing on the west side of the city. Is there any specific questions that we can answer?
Well, the development is already built out on the front side. And so you're going to stick a water plant on the next little plot there, and then you're going to put more houses behind it, is when I was looking at the map, that's what it looked like.
Right.
It doesn't feel right. I mean, just...
Right. Again, a lot of...
Because we have so much open land out behind that.
Right. Right.
But I guess it's not the city's.
Right. The city owns this one small, piece of it there, and the rest is either in the school district hands. And, as you may know, our city limits stop at Lone Star Parkway.
Yes, I saw that.
So the y'all's fence there, so the Lone Star Parkway, on that side is not quite in our city limits. And again, so, what has been in the past has been a placeholder for that. Is not anything that's so definite or set in stone that it should, give you any immediate concern. And certainly as the city council, along with the city engineers, look to where those, I guess the future facilities are needed, that's when the plans really start to take shape. But in general, we know that there's growth coming on the west side of the city, and that our water facilities are going to have to be over there somewhere. But again, there's a whole lot of unknowns.
Well, it's always not my job, so.
There's absolute validity.
Is it a treatment plant?
It would be not a wastewater plant, it would be a freshwater plant, but so it would involve a well, and most likely, and again, I'm speaking just conceptually here because I'm not an engineer, most likely it would involve an elevated storage tank or a water tower, along with a well that was able to pull the water out of the ground there and send it right up into the top of the water tower, which then adds our pressure and it's, water to everyone that we do. But again, those, to your point, when the city 10 years ago was looking at this, and the reason, the purpose for our public hearing tonight is all of this land was zoned commercial because we felt like it. Well, the landowner at the time, when he asked to be annexed, he said, I think this is all going to end up, being some type of a commercial, development out here. That's not ended up being the case. In fact, there's now, with this addition, the Section 5 that they're asking for, there would be about 200 homes there. And so, to that point, one of the things that the city will be looking at is, hey, does this facility now make sense in the context of the 200 houses around it?
Right.
Or is there something that,
A little bit more out,
Right. And then,
around the animals.
right, kind of, the periphery or either in some type of industrial or,
Okay, so this property that right now is dedicated to the city, that is your only alternative right now for a water well site on the west side of town?
without acquisition of some more land. But again, it's not a complicated thing. We would, very likely get new land for a water plant site. If it were to move, we'd get it in, likely the same way that we got this, which was the developer saying, hey, we would like to give you, a piece for this because we understand it's going to accommodate your needs.
But do you need it? I know you need it for future development, but do you need it for the future development of the subdivision?
No, sir.
Okay, you just need it for future. I mean, so anything else that develops beside the subdivision, you can spread the water out.
Yes, sir, absolutely. Of course, it's all, driven by exactly what is being proposed, but if we're talking about, say, again, like the 70-ish homes that they're proposing to build now, we certainly have enough water and don't have any reservations about, being able to serve those properties. So this side isn't, the water plant wouldn't be dependent on, any one development. It's more, the west side of the city and how those patterns are taking shape and where the water is needed.
So,
What's the effect on the water pressure when you add 70 homes to the already bad water pressure on the west side of town?
That's a question for the engineers. I do not know, but I know that they modeled it. So,
Also, it was a revelation to me just now to find out that Lone Star is the property line for the city.
for the city boundary, yes, sir.
The city, so Lone Star where it meets 105, where is the rest of the property on this west side of town? Excuse me, the city owns.
So the city owns from the inside of the parkway and the north side of 105 there for Hills of Town Creek. And those, we also, and then the high school on the south side. So say the little small property that's right outside, right next to the high school on the south side that's been for sale, looks like an older kind of ranch home right there. That property's outside the city, but right across the street and just next to them there at the high school is, those are both in.
I moved out here, first they told me we were gonna be in Navasota School District where we're at. I said, no, that's not what I'm gunning for.
Right, right. You know, especially with the high school right across the street.
I mean, I don't have any kids going to school not paying school taxes. You know, I mean, oh.
Okay, that's what I want to find out, I'm going to have to leave. I have
Absolutely.
another appointment,
So
so
I'm going to
thank
ask both of your names. Can I ask your name? too?
No, Debbie Trumbo? TRU.
Thank you so much, Ms. Trumbo.
Thank you for answering my questions.
And your name one more time.
Stan, S-T-A-N, Donaldson. Not my legal name, but I go by Stan. It's Ray Stanton, but
I'll take it. Thanks.
that's what's on all the legal papers. But so will the plant alleviate some of the water that's now being left on it? So we put on one from somewhere on the other side of town. If we put the plant in on this side, will that alleviate some of the stress on the east side?
It would obviously open up, more capacity over there because, right now it's, so all the water that ends up on the west side of the town, has to start over, by 1097 and 149 and make its way around through the city to a 12-inch line all the way out versus being able, to start out there. And according to the engineers, the distance is, because that's where you run into hydraulic loss. And every time you turn a bend, you lose a little more efficiency. So the distances between the two are what's going to make the biggest difference, to the water supply out there. So,
All right, well, thank you for your time. I've got to run myself.
Thank you for coming.
Very well.
Okay.
we happy to answer any questions from the commission on that as well.
What will be you're not the engineer here, but in my mind, I'm like, okay, once we get the west side, once it happens, where's the cutoff from the east to the west to see who gets what water? And is that a consideration?
It'll all be
Okay.
the same. It'll all be an interconnected system, so effectively...
It's pushing from both sides? Okay,
Exactly.
okay. Just,
That was going to be my question is if you have a down, an issue with a down well
You have the other
or
one.
for whatever, you've got, this will function as a backup.
That's right.
So there's only one well service in the town of Montgomery?
Right now, we have 3 water wells. Water plants 3 and 4 are right next to one another. They're, you could
Yeah.
hit a rock, they're as far apart as this room, practically, so because they're on the same side. Those are our primary water producers. Those produce 80% of our water, if not a little bit more. The water plant 2, which was one of the original water wells, sits right up here, just behind the post office area, and we get water from there, but it's not water in the volumes that we're looking at. When the engineers are looking at those 2 wells, those modern wells versus the older well that's up here, this is just not supplying enough to...
Is that because of the water source or is that because of the equipment that's pumping it?
Mainly the equipment that's pumping it is the limit, the size of the well, I think is my general understanding is that it's been tweaked as much as it can be tweaked without, kind of wholesale going in and drilling a new well on that side.
That was one of the old original ones. It's kind
Right.
of
To a
limited.
degree, according to Mike McElroy. It is
Yeah.
tuned into it to a degree. Hey, quick question for you, though, because you're suggesting that east to west is redundant. My understanding is that east to west wouldn't be redundant. It would complete the entire loop around the city, then creating a pressurized system to feed. And I also heard you mention to this gentleman that it might be a well, it might be a water tower, but I was also under the understanding that according to TCEQ, once we get 1,500 water taps in the city, that we're required to have a tower and not just another well. So are
I'm
we,
not as familiar with those requirements, but to me, that's based on the pressure deal, and if
Yeah.
you solve it with a booster pump or if you solve it with a water tower, gravity is ultimately the best thing because the power never goes off on it. You get the water up there, it's always going to pressurize the system.
Yep.
But if you, rely on an electric pump or something, then you're dependent on the generator. But
Last time I talked to Chris, he mentioned 1,500 was the water tap. Chris Wisnowski, the city engineer.
Yeah.
And so mentally, when we get to 1,500 water taps, that's what we're talking about doing a bond election, if I understand correctly, for a tower, because the tower is going to cost so much money.
Right,
So-
you know, certainly that.
And we're getting close. I mean, look how
Right.
many taps we're at, and the more we keep adding.
Right, you know, we're close to 1,000-ish taps, you know, eight to, you know, 1,000, depending on which ones you count.
And yeah, like Redbird Meadow would put us over.
Right.
So
Right.
Yeah,
in the
it's,
next 6 years, we're looking at millions of dollars of investment in infrastructure, so the time to plan is now.
absolutely.
And it is timely that we're having this discussion, because we get asked that, a lot of people are saying, when are we going to get the tower, you know, and it's always been kind of assumed it's eventually going to happen. One thing I'll add to that, as you know, is that it really costs, in the long run, it really saves on all the other, you know, lift stations and things you don't need to maintain.
I think
So-
we have 30-something lift stations for the
Yeah.
city, so you alleviate the need for so many lift stations with a tower.
Exactly.
I question the number, the threshold for clearing the tolerance for a tower. I mean, there's so many other municipalities in Texas that have had towers for better part of a century,
Yeah.
you know, and they don't have problems with water. They don't have problems with water pressure. And, you know, they're in drought-stricken areas,
Yeah.
you know, with lowered water tables. So, because of agricultural use and whatnot.
It seemed to
So,
make a lot of sense.
yeah, so I kind of don't agree with that threshold.
Right.
I mean, why be behind the curve, you know? So,
I've been saying that for the last 2 years. You're just preaching what I already say.
Yeah.
And I'll add to it that if you haven't done a tour of the water and the sewer infrastructure for the city in the last 60 days, and yes, I mean 60 days, then you should probably call Mike and ask to get one, because you can see all the new ground storage tanks that we're putting in over there and all the construction of it. And Mike can give you a wealth of information of how it's all dialed into a 1/10 of a degree, and they've toyed with the system enough that they've got it maxed to its absolute perfection, and they're doing a great job. So I totally suggest talking to Mike.
I also wonder about how sealed the water delivery system is. I mean, I worked for a company that did cured in place, you know, lining for infrastructure, you know, whether it be storm sewers, fresh water, and sanitary sewers. So that would improve the flow capacity, you know, and therefore the pressure.
Right.
So, you know, I wonder
Water
about that.
system, those guys are, they're measured enough to feel like they've got a tight system.
We had a pretty good leak last year, didn't we?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, those types of deals are a constant check for them, you know, where
Yep, we had a big, you know, a contractor digging in downtown without locating first, you know,
But in all
so.
fairness, though, even with the freeze, we didn't have a boil water notice. Like our degrees of dirt in our water, so to say, didn't regulate the fact that we needed a boil water notice. We're one of the very few cities around this area that didn't have one and didn't need one.
Yeah.
That's something to be proud about, so.
Absolutely. In Ike, this is a long time ago, but in Ike, we didn't lose water. And that was the difference between us being able to stay at our house with a kid or two.
Yeah.
You know, and it kind of cooled down enough where it was like we were camping at the house, you know, because we still had water. So that, you know.
Well, all the groundwater that, I mean, all the surface water that we got during Harvey, you know, and like you said, Snowvid. So, you know, obviously our Public Works Department is, you know, on their A game.
Absolutely.
But, you know, I just find that I hate the design protocol for you have to reach a certain threshold, you know, and that threshold is probably puts the town of Montgomery 5 to 10 years behind, maybe more.
Right. So water was, I don't think we had, I know ahead of this meeting, I didn't have anyone contact us about the rezoning or anything, and I think, you know, my water plant note got, you know, was the star of the show. that we noticed. So,
Well, and we're still in public comment, but maybe this is the best. I wanted to ask on what was sent out, just so we all know how many letters went out.
the number of letters, I can get that for you, I don't know off the top of my head, but well, again, just as a reminder, the state requires us to mail letters to property owners within 200 feet. A lot of the ones out in hills of Town Creek they fall under the same owner. We're saying 2 or 3 owners. You go off the tax roll, even if you know somebody that bought that house, the law tells you you go off the tax roll because that's the only thing that you can justify. You can look at it and say, this is a certified tax roll as of this date, and this is who you're sending these letters to. So I want to say the number was probably about 19 or 20 for Hills of Town Creek. I think the number was about 4 or 5 for the other.
Yeah, just an estimate. That's all we need, just to.
Yeah, I think we sent about 15 or 20 letters out, somewhere between 15 and 20 for Hills of Town Creek, and I think about 5 or 6 every year on 49.
Any comments back on either or?
No.
Dave, do you know if any of these people also have been, when they purchased, like in Hills of Creek, when they purchased these homes and these lots, I mean, the city's had a plan to build here for a while. This is not new notice. This is, from my information, at least 3, maybe 4 years in the works. Do you know, and these homes aren't that old, do you know if these people were told by the developer ahead of time that, hey, this is city property and there's going to be a water plant developed here?
I do not believe that. I don't think.
It doesn't sound like that.
If they're avoiding those questions, but I don't think that has been a topic of discussion. So, but to your point, it's an important one because it's.
Well, and there's more homes coming in, so I don't want to have this conversation 2 years from now when we start building, or 4 years, or however long, when we start building and breaking ground, and everybody's going,
So,
what's happening there,
do we need a sign up that says, future?
Well, that's up to the developer, the real estate agent to disclose that. And
Right, that comes down to their ethics.
Right.
What they're required to do. So.
Okay. So
So you can close this public hearing and, just note the time that we're leaving the public hearing and then back into the regular meeting.
Are we doing the public hearing on the commercial to single, and we didn't really discuss the single to the commercial?
yeah, that's
That's good for both.
Okay.
Someone can
This-
come up and speak to either item, during this public hearing.
So
Well, yeah.
do we want to, I'm still interested in that piece of property that they're talking about at 14855 North Liberty Street, turning it from a single family to a commercial.
Now, that, in terms of the deliberation, in 2
Yep.
items from now.
Okay,
Maybe 2
all
items from now.
right, okay.
Okay, good.
That's what I wanted, okay.
We need to talk about that.
Yes, we do,
Yeah, I got some good
because
stuff.
it already looks like it.
Okay, so yes, it is now 6:24, and we close this public hearing. Item number 3, consideration and possible action regarding the recommendation and report for a rezoning request for Hills of Town Creek, Section 5.
All right, under the commission, so again, this is the time that we're able to speak, about, or you guys are able to talk, specifically about each one of these individually. We develop a final report, which goes into the city council. City council has to receive this report. You've got a draft based on what I inherited when I got here in terms of, what these reports are. The reports are generally, my understanding of them is, they should be limited to things that we can touch and feel. We shouldn't, if we have an idea that something may be wrong and we're just not sure, but it's an idea we have, probably doesn't belong in the report. It needs to be something that we can substantiate to, that it's something that we have the authority to make a recommendation on. So with that, I'll be happy to talk about any of these questions, but otherwise, you guys, talk and decide. Please don't let anything in here. This is something that we can pick apart, not something that I'm just bringing to you asking you this thing.
Okay, just to be clear, we're speaking now of the Section 5 Hills of Town Creek only.
That's right.
Yeah.
I know that in the last meeting, we brought up how everything, there's a standard of what they want built, width, and depth, but with all these town creek sections that are coming up, it's being repetitive that, can we make this smaller? Can we make this different than what the standard is? And I thought it was brought up in our last meeting that, when are we going to go to standard and stick to it? And why are we always making the consideration for the difference and variance of the sizes of the lots? And I didn't feel like when we left the meeting that that was necessarily addressed enough, or, if we have a say-so in that, because we kind of went over what we're allowed to, approve and not approve, and it kind of dampened the whole conversation we were having about the measurement of the properties and the lots being consistently, it's always a variance, instead of, hey, developer, you bought it, this is what Montgomery says to do, and this is what we're going to do.
It's my understanding that city council has placed a priority on less on lot size and more on number of households and number of meters and number of income, the revenue generation. So being that is a higher priority right now than it probably was at the time when that rule was drafted, I would ask, why not update that rule? I'm with her,
Certainly, amending the ordinance is within the recommendations. That's one of the things, that you guys look at, study those, and make a recommendation to it. Like you learned last meeting, as much as you are, invested in those rules, this body doesn't decide, who gets, a variance to it. The law says, the Planning and Zoning Commission doesn't, play a role in that. The Zoning Board of Adjustment does, which is our city council.
I just want it noted.
Yes.
So the only thing we're here tonight to do is discuss from going from commercial to residential.
That's it.
Yeah.
We don't discuss lot sizes because that comes in the development stages. So the only thing we're here to do tonight is the rezoning, and that's it.
And it's on council to figure out the variances.
Correct. So we can sit here and talk about lot sizes all night long here, but that's not what we're here to discuss tonight. It's just the rezoning.
Okay, I'm ready to discuss
That is
that.
council's purveyance.
Yes, but I am ready for them to hear it again, too.
And we understand.
That's right.
The concerns.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. So are we ready for a motion?
This is to pass it on to the city council.
That's right. So what the city council is going to do, and again, is help through this process. So if you guys take the issue, you make changes, you do what you want to do to it, you leave it alone, you adopt the document that you guys say, this is our final report. Next Tuesday, the city council, they get a copy of this before they can hold their public hearing. They can't even, they can't do anything until they get your report that says, here's what we found when we looked at it. Then they have a public hearing, and then they're able to act on the rezone.
So what if we voted against it?
They would either, they can do one of two things. They can say, that makes sense to us, and they can concur, and it takes 3 of them out of 5 of them. Well, it takes a majority of them to do that. If you say no, they say yes. If they counter the P&Z's recommendation, it takes a supermajority. So it takes a 4/5 vote for the council to say, if you guys studied it, said we don't recommend this change, for them to effectively, again, to go against the P&Z's recommendation, the law says you guys have to be very sure, so sure that you get a supermajority vote to be able to override the P&Z's recommendation.
Okay.
So on our recommendation, we should put in any detail that describes, for instance, we had a good discussion when this first came up, and some of the things about the layout were a little different than on the first 4 phases, no cul-de-sacs. But we did get some answer back, and I guess if we have some real concerns, after we've had all the discussions, how do we just say, okay, we want to see this changed and then see what happens?
That goes when it comes up for development.
Right, you'd be looking at.
That's not tonight.
Comments on, on the plat, but again, tonight, we're looking at the rezone, we're looking at from one land use district to the other land use district, and that's the breadth of our focus for the actions we're taking.
This has to be done before you can have that conversation.
Correct. Correct.
So if you want to have that conversation, then now's the time to decide whether we recommend it or not, and then be prepared for what conversation you want to have based on that.
Yeah, and I think one of our frustrations is, and this has come up before, was we have our meeting, but this city council may not get, if they're not there, they don't get all of it, and maybe something gets lost in the transition. So, again, I think that's important. As we move forward, what can we do in the future so that we feel like we're communicating efficiently with city council when we have concerns? Because if they're not, unless they may look at the meeting on the
You're speaking specifically to the design of the subdivision, or is that, following?
Yes.
Well, the only way that if it comes up, when that time comes, when they bring the plats and the size and everything, if we decide, no, we're not going to go for the little lots, that's when they'll hear what we're saying.
If I can just point out one other thing too. So on these variances specific to this, those variances were approved by the zoning board of adjustment / city council at the last meeting. So if they've approved those variances and you see that plat come before you, I don't know the full answer, but please don't deny it if you don't have a specific thing that we can point to, because a plat submittal is what's called a ministerial approval. If it meets our rules, we cannot like that there's 2 cul-de-sacs instead of 4. We can not like the fact that some of these lots are funny shaped and the rest of them are all circles. But if you look and you say, these variances were granted, they've complied with that, the other standards are met, there's not the Texas law of local government code is written very purposely to make it where you can't say no because you don't like it. You have to have an adopted something that you can point to say, this is where it says you have to have, A, B, and C. But you can't take a subjective tack or make a subjective decision about something that you can follow a checklist.
You'd have to run for council.
Yeah, so really
have
concerns
that voice.
concerns that are being voiced, should be brought to a council meeting when they're discussing these,
Right. I mean, I feel like if the board feels, or the commission feels like, the intent or the desires of this commission aren't, meshing with what city council is doing, then, certainly, a conversation with them is needed. So, again, I would just, caution us not to try and use, actionable items that we've got a very specific charge with doing as a way to get the attention.
So, what is on the other side of this right now commercial property that they want to change to a single family? That's the change. What is next to it? Is it more commercial, or is it more homes, or is it raw land? Like, where on this map, here's where you're saying the subject properties,
Yes, ma'am.
which is section 5.
Yep.
So,
So that is out of the city limits there, which is why it's not colored anything. So right now, that's just a hay pasture.
so it's out of city limits, so it doesn't matter what that person does with that property. Is that a correct statement?
Right.
Well, just, if they want to subdivide it, they need to talk to us, but otherwise,
It can be whatever it wants to be. If they want a big O, okay. So we're not encouraging commercial, or residential. Okay.
And, for full disclosure on this, they can build houses whether we rezone it or not, because in commercial zones in our city, it says you can use that as a single-family residence. With the idea being that, downtown, we were going to have folks, living above and working below, and so you could leave this commercial and let them build the houses, but what you've done is a disservice to everyone who lives out there, because if their HOA goes belly up and the guy next to him decides he wants to open an auto shop out of his garage, the neighbors either have to file suit, but if they come to the city and say, well, they're breaking their deed restrictions, the cities don't enforce deed restrictions. So what we're doing here is essentially backstopping an HOA to say, well, we know that this is about to be split up into homes. It doesn't really make good sense from a planning perspective to leave it as something when where it's not going to be.
So the subject property in yellow, the area directly east of that is not in the ETJ.
It is in the ETJ.
It is in the ETJ.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Dave, am I allowed to talk, or is this a closed one? Remind me, does Robert's rule apply to this meeting too?
Certainly.
I'm obeying parliamentary procedure, so tell me no if I need to be no. I'm not.
Typically, it would be a no because
That's it.
we're not in a public hearing, but certainly.
Dave, I have a question,
Sure.
and maybe, back many years ago, is there, and correct me if I'm wrong or educate me if it's not around anymore, but was there a so-called development or developers agreement with the city, just a couple, on allowing the smaller lot sizes and so forth? That they really did not have, it was a I don't know what you call it, but unsaid word that,
Depending on, you could structure a development agreement that way if.
but I mean, was there an agreement like that?
There's not a development agreement right now that contains, a provision, say, for smaller lots or anything like that. Those still have to be looked at individually. So, if we take the Buffalo Springs, well, it's a planned development, but he still has to comply to get smaller lots. He still has to come to the city to say, hey, I want to build something less than the 9,000 square foot, 75 by 120 lot. We wouldn't be able to build a smaller lot than what was on the books in 2004.
So where are we and why are we continuing to allow the smaller lots?
In terms of that's what the developers are asking for, again, it's a bigger conversation than I think, than you could have, in an evening, I suppose, but, what we do as a city is a response to a couple of things, not least of which is market forces. If a city, by its residents, want to elect its city council members to say, we're interested in lots that are, we don't want to go any smaller than this. That's a perfectly reasonable, approach to take. But you take it in the context of saying, and what that means is a $400,000 or $200,000, price point for your house. You can see what that's going to do to the composition of your community. And it's not a bad thing to do that. Lots and lots of cities, effectively, structure their socio-economic, composition through zoning. And I personally don't agree with that. I think, it's more about, the market, telling us in a response. But one thing that I would caution you on is, because the city established a 75 by 120 foot lot in 1994, there's nothing gospel about that size of lot. If we like it, that's fine, but there's nothing magic about it. It was picked as a, tipping point based on a set of criteria.
Are the design criteria set in terms of the upcoming infrastructure plans for the higher density
Yes.
construction?
Yes.
Because
The city-
that's where we're headed.
Yep, the city is.
And that's where council is voting to head in their variances that they've been giving. So we have, we have opportunity as a city to have higher revenue. But we also have a responsibility to the residents in the density of the community.
Right. And,
So-
many cities, we are, as a small city in the past who has not really been that active in terms of what we've had to wrestle with in terms of zoning, we are in a growing minority of cities that only have one type of single-family residential zone. Most cities, or most modern cities now, have more than one footprint or density of zoning. And, in fact, we have an unofficial, because the city council, never got to the step of adopting it. We've got a future land use plan. That's a rule of thumb that we use, certainly staff uses, the engineers use when we talk to developers, that show areas like this Hills of Town Creek Section 5 being a higher density residential than what the standard is. So it's, as one of the tools that, that we use in looking at it is, when we're looking at it to make a recommendation on a variance, or the engineers are to council, we are looking at those documents like that future land use plan that do contemplate, hey, I bet not all single-family residential is going to end up looking the exact same.
Yeah, and I think that could really help, because I know we've had a rash of these small lots in the last couple of years, but going back a ways, that really helps, Dave, if you all can keep going back to that density, because the ultimate goal was to have a mix, some high density and some larger. Yes, we've had a lot of smaller lately. I think we have to remember, too, that nobody had a crystal ball 20 years ago, 25 years ago. Things evolve, things change. They might have thought it looked like they should have commercial on Lone Star, but once the new community center came in, nobody wants to put commercial next to that, and that will probably be more residential. But my point is simply, we have to remember, this is not like the Woodlands where they had the advantage of having this huge blank page and being able to lay it all out. It's just not the way it is. So
I think that taxpayers of the Woodlands are the same as the taxpayers in Montgomery, and that is the desire to maintain their property value.
mm-hmm.
And part of that property value has to do with the ability of the infrastructure to deliver the service that it's committed to do, and the ability of the city residents to be able to move around in the city, in town, using the roads that are here. And the fact that, the car count, the head count, the demands for all of our infrastructure are growing quicker than we can keep up with. I mean, obviously, we're behind the 8 ball on the water tower.
I don't think so. That's just my opinion.
No.
We've got a lot of engineering. We won't get into all the detail at this point.
I just feel like that, this city has a commitment to the taxpayers to maintain property value of those that have built and live here now. In addition to the folks that are moving in, and they're moving here for the good school districts, for the access to the lake and the access to work in Houston and the Woodlands. So, I hope that our rules that have been put in place to ensure property value, are balanced in an equitable fashion, leaning towards, what the history has been here and allow for some higher density, but not across the board. And not everywhere that some developer wants it, but to actually funnel it where it suits the residents of this town to have it. So,
Is this, whether we like it or not, agree with it or not, whatever our stance is of all of us on this commission, that is going to be a place where homes are built. Is that a correct statement?
Yep, unless the private property owner decides that he would like to build something different there.
And so tonight we're here to say whether it's commercial or residential.
That's right.
And I will say this, I live in a place where there is no HOA, and it is very expensive to get someone to fight for you when someone does put in a business behind you that is not nice and is not making your home value go up. So I move that we make a vote, and we either vote yay or nay for the variance to make it commercial.
Not a variance.
Not a variance, excuse me.
It's just to
Sorry.
pass our
Yeah.
recommendation on to the city council
Yeah.
to change.
From
Hilton.
commercial to residential.
Correct.
I mean, they're going to build, and if it's commercial and somebody can start an auto body shop 2 houses down from you and park on your street, I would not want to have commercial property. I would like residential property. I was spending the money in a nice subdivision on a nice road to have a home.
I will admit that's an extreme example, right? Because,
But it does happen in Montgomery. It does
and
happen in Montgomery.
that, what I was saying, that affects their property value, tremendously.
So, well, that said, I move to approve the rezoning of the Hills of Town Creek Section 5 from B commercial to R1 residential.
I second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The motion passes. Thank you, and that was a good discussion first.
And that was a motion to recommend the city council be at this time on the floor, right?
Correct.
And it was an effort to have a balanced discussion, pros and cons, by the way. So,
Who was the second on that? I apologize. Was that
Bill.
Mary or Bill?
Bill,
Bill.
Okay, moving on to item 4 on the agenda, consideration and possible action regarding a recommendation and report for a rezoning request for 14855 North Liberty Street, Montgomery, Texas.
And the commission, same format in terms of a report to city council. We are making a recommendation to them for them to act. And I'll be happy to answer any questions or help guide the discussion as you'd like.
It looks like it's already commercial opposed to the way it used to look. I have the same concern is, well, not concern, I have a question. If we make it a commercial instead of residential, can they go back to residential even though it's commercial and own a car shop out of it, example?
Right, they can live, with it being zoned commercial, you can live as a single-family residence on commercial property. You can.
And is the land at the hill, is that commercial or residential?
That's what.
They cleared it all out?
So what we see, so if you see on this map here on the exhibit that was included with that one, the red dash there is his 1.5 acres that he's cleared. And then just up the hill, you see another single family piece. That, at least according to the tax rolls, is owned by Mount Sinai Baptist Church. According to Arnett, he talked to them, they didn't think they owned it, so we, candidly don't know if, does the county have something wrong there? Have they, pegged that as being owned by the church and it's not? Is there there's certainly a lot of properties on the north side of the city that is less than clear.
what's the street address for the adjacent property, the residential property? Just curious, do you know?
It very likely is not assigned an address.
Okay. It's
why
somebody's
this-
paying taxes on it.
It can be right, but you don't have to have a street address to pay taxes on property. You need a mailing address where they can mail you a bill. But
Did you mail them something?
I mailed everyone within the 200 foot, yes, ma'am.
And that person, do you know who you mailed it to in that little area that says it's Mount Sinai?
I mailed it to them.
To Mount Sinai, the church? Okay.
Yeah, I've got some real concerns too. We had a lot of good discussion last time. The water, that old water treatment plant, I know we've kept the permit and there's a good chance it could come back on.
The sewer treatment plant,
Yeah.
yes, sir, there's.
And that's not a big issue, but
There's
then,
almost a certainty that it will be reactivated as a wastewater treatment plant. Again, not your engineer, but based on everything we know, that's going to be reactivated.
but it's not a done deal. It's not set in stone. I mean, I look at the whole area and, I mean, what if that ever didn't happen, that could become residential, but you've got a long frontage along that road. That lot is pretty long, and that's a lot of frontage on the road. And my concern is if we went commercial, that, anything could go in there. And then you've got the lot just to the south of it. But then across the street, those are all residential, unbuilt lots, but there could be many lots fit into that long stretch directly across the street, which is zoned residential. I don't know if one person owns all those, but or if they got the letter. And then the backyards of Buffalo Springs, that looks to me like that's closer than 200 feet, but I don't know, it's probably close. It's not, okay.
Is it across the street the propane tank though?
Yes, the propane tanks are,
Yeah.
are a big, part of it.
And it's in a floodplain.
And a
So
good portion of
building
this
is big
property.
babies.
And
Well, just that lowest, when you get down the bottom of the hill, but that's only near Lake Town Creek is where it's low. I guess my couple concerns are, like we've discussed earlier, property value could really be affected there for future growth across the street, and that's all residential possibility there. I know it's a janitorial business, but what he's done to the renovation, it looks great. The house is good. I guess we are told it's going to be an office for the janitorial service.
no, sir, I do want to make sure we're not told anything.
Okay.
We didn't ask the reason.
Well, even if it's a janitorial service, you could have 50-gallon drums out, you could have all kinds of, we would need more detail. My feeling right now is, if anything, to do what we've done before is a special use permit, possibly once we got the detail as far as how it's going to look and what's going to be outside, and possibly consider special use, because then, it's controlled. That's the only use, and it's controlled, and if it goes away, you can't become. My concern is if we went straight commercial, then, anything could go in there eventually. So I guess I'm just, as we're looking at the size of all that residential gray area on both sides of 149 that was surrounded, it's all pretty close.
But if we say residential, can he run his janitorial business out of there?
No.
So we're stopping him from having a business that he already has, basically. Well, we're not stopping, we're making the recommendations.
Office, but again, I don't want to, please don't tie any thoughts of plans to that, because you're not being asked to make a decision on what we think a plan is. We're asked specifically for the land use. I'll just say, as as a planner, as the staff that's recommended to you, I don't see any property on 149 being a viable home site. I just don't. It's me. I drove by today. I don't want to move my family there. I don't know why anyone would want to live on a corridor as busy as 149 or 105 or 1097. And I think the ship has sailed on those being home sites.
What about the traffic and I know that the road is there, and I watched them build it up. They did a really good job building it back up, because they would stick their truck and their equipment there all the time, and it looks like to be pretty stable now. So let's just say if it was commercial, even if the gentleman stays there for the next 30 years, in the next 30 years, will there be my concern is concrete trucks or dump trucks or, I mean, what?
Traffic.
Just traffic itself and pulling into that, let's just say it's commercial. So we maintain 149, well, I mean, he doesn't, that commercial person doesn't. So his commercial property with the influx of no telling what, in and out of there, to me, it's just a traffic nightmare. That's what it looks like it is to me. The placement of the house and where there's a place to park and stuff, I completely understand though what he wants, what that person wants because they want a commercial. I understand completely. I just don't know the longevity of.
I guess that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, I mean,
the length of that, the frontage, the length of that is a lot, and depending on what goes in there 10 years down the road, traffic was in and out was a concern of mine. And we've got people from Buffalo Springs, about 12 homes that back right up to what they thought was residential. They have always thought those are residential lots. People have asked me about that. And they.
You're talking about the one on the east side of the street?
Oh, they're by the butane
Talking
tank?
about all the homes that back up to the lot, what's not developed right now, that would be on 149. There's a fence, but when they bought those houses, I'm sure they were told, I mean, that land is residentially zoned.
Now, if I can, I may be going far, but I think it's a stretch to start, if we want to regulate other people's property to preserve somebody else's view.
Yeah.
That starts to not sound like private property anymore.
Right. We're going back to the same thing as the Hills of Town Creek. That is an existing sewer plant there, and more than likely it is going to be brought up to an operational. So.
What resident would want to live there?
Exactly.
Right?
So the best purpose for those there, and Dave, you're correct, the lots down through there are not large enough to build a commercial building on because of your setbacks and whatnot.
Right, they still have to comply with all the regulations.
Exactly. So as far as letting that go to be commercial with the water treatment plant going to be right back behind it, nobody's going to buy that thing residential anyhow. So again, you're strapping that property owner into, that's all he's going to be able to do.
Right. One thing to consider it in the context of is you guys are always charged with determining the highest and best use is what the planning world calls it. You determine the highest and best use, of a piece of property, in your decision making.
That's what I was that was my point I was gonna bring up. Looking at the frontage on 149, the traffic through that corridor, the adjacent property use being institutional. If I'm looking at this in the absence of zoning as an appraiser, that's my trade, that's what I'm seeing. If I was a real estate agent, that's what I'm going to sell it as, because that's the highest and best use of it. That's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck on that property. It's not appealing to a residential buyer, or there's not a market for it. And if there is, it's incredibly small. So to me, it makes sense to rezone it to commercial use.
And Dave, you indicated maybe 4 or 5 letters were sent out, so we have to assume at least that stretch, whoever owns that land there.
If you see the green outline there, the green outline are the properties that all got letters.
Okay.
So
4.
I'm looking at a GIS map, and the dimensions I see for that lot are 174 feet of frontage, Jeff.
So that's 2 lots. How deep is it?
That's one lot.
Well, 75 and 75 is the frontage. What we ask for, 125 is the depth.
Well,
normally.
actually, it's 72 and 174 across the front. The sidelines are 167 on one side and it doesn't, 167 to 170. So the back line is 245 feet. So the front is slightly longer, so it's probably 250-foot frontage on 105. I mean, excuse me, 149.
So if we were to let that go commercial, there's quite a bit of frontage there for,
But that's what a commercial user is going to want, is the frontage and exposure.
It's,
And if we leave it residential, we have, the city has no guidelines. If he wants to split that to 4 little lots.
Yes, that's what I was
It's
just
not a
saying.
subdivision.
it's over half an acre.
Well, but what I'm
Yeah.
saying is, if somebody residential wants to come in there and put 4 little tiny homes in there,
They can
he
do it.
because that's his property.
Yeah.
Whereas we go commercial, then we have guidelines in that.
Can he have 4 small commercial, if we make it commercial because of the lot sizes, like you're saying, can he have 4 different businesses? But because of the placement of the house, that house sits in the middle of it.
Well, he would have to, if he was going to have 4 separate businesses, he would have to split those off to 4 separate lots.
Right.
You could build,
Unless he leases it out.
you could do like a retail center on the same piece of property, or, just depending on how you did it.
But my thing is, like Dave says, we can't strap a person with the land behind him. And that, there's no way that those 2 lots that sit with that water treatment plant are ever going to.
Yeah, because then they're going to be coming to us and saying, hey, it smells, it stinks.
Sooner or later,
They're going
somebody's going
to,
to
height
come to it.
fence, what are you going to do, city, if we do it residential?
Right.
What's the institutional allowance, like what would an institutional use allow for?
City, church, schools. So right now, all of that property is ours. We own, there's 2 acres, of sewer plant site. There's the 8.5 kind of squiggly acres there to the along the creek is, largely floodplain, largely too steep to build on. I'm not sure when or how the city acquired the whole site, but the smaller rectangle right next, or that just backs up, that's the actual footprint of the sewer plant itself.
Well, I would like to make a motion to recommend changing of the zoning from at 14855 North Liberty from R1 single family to B commercial.
Second.
we have a motion, we have a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 The motion passes.
Is there any opposition?
Oh, I'm sorry, I should say, yeah. Is there any opposition? No. Okay, very good. Good discussion. Moving on to number 5 on the agenda. Convene into public hearing regarding the rezoning request for A, Hills of Town Creek, Section 5, from B, commercial to R1, single-family residential, and B, 14855 North Liberty Street, Montgomery, Texas, from R1, single-family residential to B, commercial. And Dave, let me just mention, there's a very minor typo on the first draft on this, on the one going from residential to commercial.
The one we just did, is that the one?
Yes, the one we just did. It's on page, let's see. The part where it talks about the Eastleys. Okay. Yeah. Should be, trying to look for page number 12, page 12. On the second line down, Consider a request from Arnett and Sherry Easley to reclassify the property as R1 single-family residential, period. No, it should be just the opposite. So,
Thank you for that.
sure, since we're going to have to do a final draft, copy on that. Okay, so any public comments?
Are we officially back in public comment mode? Is that what you're telling me, Jeff?
All right, I'm going to call this 7:05 for us.
Yes, it is now 7:05. Are there any public comments?
Yes, please. I would like to make.
Please identify yourself.
Do you need me to go to the podium too?
That's okay.
I'm Julie Davis from City Council. So I would like to point out that a couple things from a City Council perspective. Please forgive me, but I've never, except for one time when I wasn't on City Council, shown up to a PNC meeting. I feel enlightened, and Allison and Ms. Walker, if I had known that your concerns were for smaller lot sizes, I thought we were giving variances because you gave variances. So I thought it was just a rubber stamp, pass it through because, well, PNC already gave it. So your guys are the ones who set the zoning. We have rules, I would love to stick to them. I will tell you firsthand that I'm the one who's pushing for some lower cost homes, but it doesn't mean that I want to sacrifice less land. So whatever our zonings are in regards to the structure on the property, I would like to see larger lots with smaller pieces of property that are more, or smaller pieces of houses that are more affordable for people. Our town is too expensive for starters, and we have no middle class, which causes a huge issue that we're seeing across the entire state and across the entire country of a labor force. But we had the labor force problem before COVID hit. So those are my concerns. I probably won't ever miss another PNC meeting again now because I feel so enlightened. But in regards to Hills of Town Creek, I was under the impression, Dave, correct me, that once a subdivision for a property developer gets a zoning variance on a smaller lot width, then any adjacent property owner that then develops that, so if they are touching that development any way, shape, or form, that then they can petition for the same variance based upon the fact that the property lines are touching.
There's nothing that will stop them from doing that, but there's absolutely no, because this property here got it, there's no intention to have to do it because it's touching or anything else. You know, they can make the case that, hey, you know, we see this, we see the pattern, and we want to be consistent with that pattern. They can make that argument, and it's a fair one to make, but there's nothing that gives them somehow kind of a head start to what the council would ultimately, or the zoning board.
And maybe that's the way it's been communicated, is that they would have a small leg to stand on based upon the fact that other properties around it have similar variances.
Right, you know, the attorneys would certainly caution you that, you know, you never set a precedent, even though it feels like sometimes people do, and I know that there's a lot of heartburn on all boards and councils and commissions because I've served on all, and the idea of, you know, are we setting a precedent? You know, frequently comes up. The short answer is no, you never are. You always have the ability, because you make a decision here, you don't lose options down the road.
You do set a precedent, though, with the taxpayers, in that Julie's number one thing that she said was lower water pressure, problems with water pressure. When do we get our water tower? We're having problems with water pressure.
That's the biggest complaint I hear from Hills of Town Creek
Exactly.
is nobody has water pressure.
That's the precedent. So in terms of, those are the ultimate, they're the taxpayers, and we're the taxpayers, and we use that infrastructure. So the precedent that we set is, you know, that we have the ability to back up, you know, our plans with.
In those feasibility reports, like we covered last time, if you want to get off into the weeds on you know, water sewer capacity, all that's covered in there. I mean, that's part of.
Exactly, but that was her first statement. So, you know.
public session.
as a concern.
Yeah, it is
So-
my concern.
It certainly should be, but.
And that's
it's-
where some of us are coming from, is that we too have those concerns and we want to balance that with the growth. But, you know, the variances are special. They're not, they should not be used as a regular means to circumnavigate the ordinances that are on the books.
Right,
So,
certainly, again, just to clarify one point, is this body will never make a recommendation on variance.
No.
State law does not
No.
allow you to make that.
but we have the ability to make a recommendation still. And, you know, and to be able to have a rapport in the community, whether it be public hearings or, you know, this hearing that's on public record for YouTube. So, you know, for everybody to see. And so the city residents count on those of us that are asked to sit or voted onto the boards or councils to consider that, you know, we don't get ahead of ourselves in the development, that we're not thinking about the fact that people suffer if they've lost water pressure, or they suffer if mobility is an issue, because, you know, we're regularly granting variances as opposed to changing ordinances.
I would just caution us not to lose sight of the actual data, because I'm scared what you're suggesting is it sounds like you want to make a decision in absence of the engineer's data. It's the
What I'm
engineers
saying
that are
is that,
charged with that.
what I'm saying is that, you know, we need to take a balanced approach like you had mentioned before.
Right. But, you know, just to be clear, this board is not charged with considering or figuring out, you know, is there enough water on this side of town? The city's paid people to do that.
That's right.
So, and
But there's a city council person sitting right there, and her first thing was,
Apparently, the pressure meets the state requirement. Just for the record, the pressure in Hills of Town Creek does
At the
meet
moment.
minimum requirement ethically, so I did verify that. And apparently, it will for a long time to come, even adding these homes. And there's a fine dance to be had, like you say, between maintaining a relationship with an established developer that's building multi-million dollars worth of taxing assets for us to continue to operate off of. So there's value there too in this developer. I don't see how we can change the trajectory of Hills of Town Creek at this moment, but I would like to see a better initiative moving forward of maintaining our larger lot sizes. That's just my personal opinion. I feel like there is value in land and spacing things out a little more, but I also feel like there's value in allowing somebody to build a small home on a 75 by 120 foot lot. We don't have to build a 5,000 square foot home on that lot. We can build a 1,000 square foot home on that big lot.
Well, there's also
People
demand
sometimes-
for,
I moved to Montgomery, bought 10 acres, and I lived in a 3,000 square foot house. I came and built and bought here because I had the land to stretch out on.
but that's, and another thing to consider, though, is a lot of people are desiring like a smaller lot size too. There's always going to be that demand. You're going to have older people or, you know, couples that are busy all the time and working out of town. They don't want to maintain a large lot.
that's
So-
always been the beauty of Montgomery, though. You know, the attraction of Montgomery is, say that in downtown, you know, historical district, the lot sizes are smaller and they're highly desirable. However, on the outskirts, you know, there's lots of varying sizes. And, you know, so what I'm driving at is that, you know, Montgomery is always been a town that has people from all walks of life, and, you know, including agricultural. And so, you know, as far as the development is concerned, to be able to have a variety, as we had discussed before, a balanced approach, as opposed to leaving it up to variances, you know, and whatnot all the time. That's what I'm driving at, is,
I don't feel like we have, I've lived in Montgomery for 8 years now, and I've lived in Montgomery County for 26 years, and I don't feel like the city of Montgomery has people from all walks of life, so you and I disagree on that. I feel like you have long-term, lifetime residents who inherited their property and will always live here generationally over and over and over and over again because they inherited land and they never sell it. And then I feel like you have new money people who came in and they got tired of the city and they didn't care how much, and you're seeing it all over the hills of Town Creek. You have, this one owner bought up 50 lots and now he's just going to use it as his rental property. And he doesn't live here, he lives in California, but he bought all this property in the city and he doesn't care what happens in the city. But he's paying taxes to own this property in the city that we're governing, and he's got renters everywhere. And so those people rent here and he makes tons of money and takes it out of our city and doesn't spend it in our city because those people that are renting those homes can't afford to buy here. That's the struggle, is that a single young couple starting out that just graduated college or just started their career and never went to college, they can't afford to buy here. We have nothing affordable for them.
But-
Even Hills of Town Creek is starting at $270,000, and the new development that we're talking about over at 1097 and 149, we originally talked to that developer about starting out at the 150s, 180s. He's already up to $240,000 because of the cost to build has gone up that much.
That's nationwide.
It's-
And I know.
It's the market. I mean, it's the market.
Yeah.
And we can't dictate the market as a city.
Right. But how do we make it where people from all walks of life can live here? Because we
The
don't
same way
have
that-
starter homes.
The same way that every other community does and is, but in terms of if you want smaller and smaller lots or smaller and smaller homes on certain lots, then plan that. We've drafted a plan, a master plan for Montgomery, as opposed to variances. Write that into, create an ordinance or a plan that accommodates that, make a difference,
But have you looked at the master plan? The master plan includes literally a half a mile wide by half a mile deep in the downtown area. It doesn't include any of this that we're talking about. None of this build out is in the master plan. Not Redbird Meadows, not Hills of Town Creek, and certainly not 1097 and 149. We paid an arbitrary amount of money to do a master plan, and it didn't include our entire 4.5 mile city.
It's part of the community though.
Well, the scope was, just to be fair, that was a wholly different scope. That downtown master plan was specifically for the downtown. But you would never do something like that for your entire city.
Right, but that's the difference between the Woodlands and here. The difference is that the people in the Woodlands, there was one property owner who owned it all, and he said, this is what's going to happen, and he dictated it. We don't own all the land. So we can't, this is monopoly in real life. We can't dictate what people are going to build or do in every circumstance because we don't own all the land.
There's a lot of, planning and adjusting as you go.
That's my point.
It makes for a challenge. It's not necessarily a bad thing, and don't get me wrong.
It's called, do you want to lead or do you want the cart leading the horse, the developers leading, the
I
development?
will give you that. I feel the same way though, Allison. I feel like as a city that we are at least 5 to 10 years behind on infrastructure. And I've stated that for a long time. I have lived in the city and paid city taxes for 8 years, and am one of the few people who does not have water or sewer, and probably won't until Redbird Meadows construction.
I've heard you mention that several times in council.
Yeah.
Traffic problems, people speeding down your road and threatening,
And it's this road, it's like this,
threatening
over
your
here.
kids and all this development. And that's my point, is, that there has to be a balanced approach as opposed to the cart leading the horse. And so,
But I would love it if you guys did, and I don't know what their legal limits are. I'm new to this. Maybe I should have checked in earlier, and I apologize. Please forgive me for that. I would love to hear you say, we're making this recommendation to rezone this with the discussion or the kickback of, we would like to see larger lots in the future, so that it's attached to it. Maybe it's not,
You shouldn't do that.
you shouldn't.
No, but
So how
what
do we
we,
communicate from here to city council? And the same thing we're having with MEDC, how do we communicate from MEDC to here?
that was the discussion we had the last meeting, is how do we bridge that gap?
see, the
Because-
problem is, if a developer knows that he can only do 7,000 to 9,000 square foot lots, he's not going to buy property in Montgomery.
Right, because it doesn't, he can't make money.
Exactly.
He can't make money on this
Exactly.
build. I totally understand that because
And
I watched that.
if you say we want bigger lots and smaller houses, he's going to make that money somewhere.
Right, so you
So
can
it's,
upsell the land.
exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So there's nothing we can do by saying, okay, Mr. Developer, you're going to come in here and you're going to put up 9,000 square foot lots. He'll say, see, I'll go on down the road.
Right.
I think the market does dictate, and I think the only thing we can ask our administrators to do, to staff, is to really, the goal has been to have good working relationships with developers. And if we can have reputable, moral developers that try to do, and that's usually from a track record. They've got to come from somewhere where they've been doing this for quite a while, and they have different, like Ryland or whoever, they have different levels, and then that's where Dave can refer to his maps that show high density versus, we do have, let's use what we've got some of that, maps with high density versus low density. Louisa was going to be one that was a bigger lot.
Well, we still have all of Chief's property that's not developed, and he's got his tax abatement for another
The only
2
property
years.
he's got under, the only property that I'm aware of that he's got a development agreement is this Hills of Town Creek. So with that, so he's,
Oh, Lefebvre is what I'm talking about. I'm sorry, wrong name. I totally apologize.
No.
Lefebvre's property, he's got the,
so he does have a development agreement that, again, it runs out in a few years. There's a series of agreements and a series of years. It's kind of a-
and that's the mess, but he has a couple of years to develop that into anything he wants, and we can't really do much about any of that.
And to be clear, whatever he wants stays in place forever.
Right.
That's what a planned development
That's right.
is going to be.
So if he sells it to somebody,
Right, it's still a planned development that says he can do, whatever that agreement. So the expiration agreements don't affect how or what he can do.
So the things that we can control are
there's
so little. I mean, it's so little, and we now no longer can annex anything else outside. So what we have is what we have unless people want to come to the city. So if we don't make it attractive,
And that's
this
always-
is what we get. Like in the next 10 years, we're going to be built out, and you're going to be maxed on where your tax structure is. And if we don't do it right, guys, we fail a whole bunch of people.
Well, we all have similar concerns, and you bring up, and this is a very general discussion, and I think that's okay. It's okay. We don't want to see some of these things get to a point where, too many renters and all those. But, and I'll just say, back to the developers, I'm not pointing fingers at any developers. I just think as we move forward, we've got some issues where there's a lot of people jumping on the bandwagon saying, oh, prices are going up every hour, and some of that can be taken advantage. It's a perfect storm to say, oh, now we're going to charge this much. Some of those prices are already, some of those things take care of themselves. And what do you do about that? I don't, it's hard to control it.
Those development agreements that we're talking about with Philip Lefebvre were done during the last housing downturn.
Correct. But that's my
And
concern is what's coming next.
2008,
This is what we're setting ourselves up for. If we do 1 million of these small home developments and we overprice them because of the massive inflation from COVID, and then you have people who continue to lose jobs, we're setting ourselves up for a massive housing crisis. So the more of these we authorize in our own community, the more issues that we're looking at in the next 10 to 20 years
Well,
from
yeah,
a housing crisis.
the only thing the city can do is just make sure we do not make any more of those agreements.
Absolutely.
I mean, that'll stop it.
and the city doesn't get themselves into too much debt that it can't be serviced, trying to keep up with the development process, so, and that's been my concern.
Okay.
Well, as a reminder, we're still in a public hearing, which we'll want to close out, and, once we do another time, whenever y'all decide, I can talk all night about this. But whenever y'all decide, we're done.
As far as Arnett Easton's property, just one more thing I'll say. His property is looking amazing. And I honestly couldn't imagine them putting houses there to live in. I'm sorry, I mean, the sewer treatment plant doesn't stink, even when it's functional operational, but just something about the thought of living in front, like literally like when your children are playing there in the city sewer treatment plant, I just couldn't fathom it. So I couldn't imagine not making it commercial. I would have thought that it would have been commercial anyway. If we had any issues, that I don't ever think we would, and that leaked or seeped or overflowed, all that property is downhill a bit.
That backyard would be good.
Yeah. Stick a strip center up there and call it done. Just personal thoughts.
Thank you. Okay, it's now 7:26, and we are closing the public hearing. Okay, one last item, number 6 on the agenda, consideration and possible action regarding a report for City Council concerning a special use permit application for Symmetry Browse located at 20165 Eva Street, Suite C, Montgomery, Texas.
Members of the commission, this is a recommendation. So the state of Texas class, I don't know much about microblading, intradermal cosmetics, permanent makeup, or anything above, but it's a thing. And the state licenses that in the exact same way they license a tattoo artist. Our table of uses says if you want to open a tattoo business, city council has to give their blessing on it. And that's, specifically for the integrity of the neighborhood and the surrounding, area. That's why it falls into one of those businesses that we can look and say, let's pause for a second. We, as the planning and zoning sort of function of this, don't have to have a public hearing. We don't have to send letters and send notices. We have to provide city council a report before they can hold a public hearing. So they have to hold a public hearing on this, and then they can act on it. The city has 2 of these already. They're both in the downtown from several years ago. I don't know either of them.
Are they operating? Because I know I've sat on 2 of them. We've granted, and I don't think that either one of them ever opened, did they?
I'll be honest, I could not tell you. I know that the most recent one, Michelle Welch, I believe, she was in the Kevin Barnes building. She opened up upstairs. I believe her husband worked upstairs in the Barnes building at the time. I think he may have worked for NASCA or one of those companies that moved out. So I'm not sure if she's still up there. I don't know, again, anything about whether or not they're operating or not.
Well, my concern when I read this was, personally, I don't want a tattoo place, period, in downtown Montgomery. I will vote no on no uncertain terms. But I do know that there is permanent makeup that is done in salon-type settings. I understand for the establishment of the business, this person probably went to school, they're probably experienced, and the demand is there, and people want to come downtown. I understand that. If we say yes, which evidently we've already said yes 2 times prior, does that leave the door open for the tattoo artist that wants, okay, so that is off the table. This is strictly cosmetic,
Right.
strictly,
The special use permit that
All
we
right.
have to get to do this, specifically says that it is microblading.
Okay,
and,
it's specific.
For this, you can't, while the state has, the blanket license of, you're considered a tattoo artist, when this person applies with the state health department to get their permit, they have to say what they do. Do they do, tattooing? Do they do microblading? Do they do this, again, intradermal, permanent makeup? Do they do piercings? It cannot go from a makeup, from a permanent makeup or a microblading, either with our regulations, again, through the special use permit, says you can do microblading, and that's not giving somebody a normal tattoo. Like it could never open, but not only do our regulations say that, the state and the license they have with the state doesn't allow them to kind of move from one to the other, to start
Okay.
off saying I'm doing eyebrows, but ends up I'm doing
Yeah, your arms. Two questions. What is the time frame for a special use permit?
These have 5 years generally is what I've seen. That's the draft that's.
And they come back and and if they want to change, say they want to add, let's just say right now they say microblading, but then they go, oh, you know what, I think I want to do eyeliner, permanent makeup, you know? So would they have to come to city council again and say, look, I want to add to this because they've added it to their licenses through the state? Or is this as it gets specific? You know, because people grow when they do this profession, it grows with microblading, then eyeliner, and then it's lip liner, and,
Well, and then
That's
technology.
what I've seen, they did include both, because I think it was a similar, kind of spot to work.
okay. So it's a 5-year time frame, and if it changes, they come back,
Right.
and at the end of
They couldn't go get licensed, say, in another type of cosmetic, makeup.
Right.
And then start doing that under that,
okay. And did they ask for piercing in this one? They didn't,
No, they're
okay.
not doing anything like a normal tattoo.
Okay.
Place. Now, if they were gonna do, I'll be honest, I don't know about ear piercings, I don't know if ear piercing places have to be licensed with the state if they consider it, I guess it's body piercing.
Well, they do at the mall. I don't know.
Yeah.
Gosh.
There's a lot of stuff done at the mall.
Well, eyebrows are basically body media.
Yeah.
So that opens the door to potential for other body media. And so is there any opportunity or need to change the 5-year time frame?
What I know about microblading, it's pretty expensive. It's basically there's filling in your eyebrows with
Ink,
ink.
and it's painful.
It's usually part of like a high-end beauty salon where they're going to do waxings and all that kind of stuff. So I wouldn't feel a need to limit the timeline of their.
Because they, like Dave said, this is a separate license from tattooing.
Okay.
Yep.
Right, when they,
That's what-
when they're asking the state, and the state gives them a license, it says this is what you can do.
And who checks on that? Who goes into their establishments to make sure that that's all they're doing?
The city has a right to, but the city generally doesn't
Okay.
have an interest in going in and, if we felt like something was going on, but I don't know of any time that either this city, has gone to kind of spot check to see.
See 8 or 9 motorcycles out front.
Right.
Or all those. So now my next question, I guess, is signage. So I guess, is that going to be added to this Suite C?
Certainly they'll have a sign there that doesn't need any approvals,
Okay,
outside of a sign permit.
Okay.
We've got to comply with, the name of the business is Symmetry Brows. I know a little bit about, again, they're going in between the Chipotle and Ruthie Grace. I know a little bit about the developer and in terms of their sign requirements, and they've got very high standards.
All right.
In terms of what they want to build.
Well, Montgomery is a beauty and wedding destination, so,
I've spoken with the applicant, who's not here tonight, obviously, but she's done this apparently for a number of years. She sounds younger than me, but I don't think this is her first time doing this. So,
I just don't want a tattoo parlor, that's all I'm saying.
right, and this is, I do want to make clear that this could never morph into a tattoo parlor that you think of, that someone walks in and gets a body ink type.
And being exposed to 105 and other stores like that, we're going to see if it's a tattoo parlor.
And again, just knowing the developer, if this turned into a...
Oh, Ruthie Grace probably wouldn't put up with it either, Chipotle, either with hot, yeah.
These places are gonna be on the home of their landlord quick.
Yeah.
So do we approve the special use
You make
here?
a recommendation to city council, just like our other recommendations. If they want to affirm the recommendation, it takes a simple majority. If they want to go against the recommendation, it would take a super majority.
I'll make a motion to pass on to the city council approval of a special use permit for, what is it? Cemetery Browse, located at 20165 Eva Street, Suite C, Montgomery, Texas.
Okay, there's a motion. Any further discussion needed?
Only a second.
Second.
I'm sorry, yeah. Second? We have a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, say aye. No opposition, it's unanimous. The motion passes. Okay, well, we just need one more motion. You know what that is?
I have a commission inquiry, so, okay, wait, so whatever's within the city boundaries, there's no ETJ anymore?
No, we do have ETJ.
Okay, so whatever's within the ETJ, but there's no going beyond that at this moment, or ever in the future, or?
To touch a little bit more on the annexation thing, so used to, so we've always lived by the same rules because we're less than 5,000 people. And so the state of Texas has always held for type A general law cities, which is a city less than 5,000, that you cannot force annexation or you cannot initiate any annexation. You had to be asked for somebody to voluntarily be annexed. Cities like Conroe, once you got above the 5,000 threshold, which if you follow any of the stories in the past and watch just their seemingly incredible fervor at annexing anything they could, is because they knew this law was coming in a couple sessions. They could see it. But the state law has made it now where even if you're the city of Houston, you can't say, we're annexing you, whether you like it or not. Now, all cities have to play by our rules, which is you got to be nice enough for people to want to be in instead of, not be. And there's a lot of advantages for it. And that, in talking with folks today, in the proliferation of mud districts outside of city boundaries is, our tax rate, compared to a mud rate is so incredibly attractive that, again, with reasonable guidelines and reasonable rules to follow, we look like a place that we want to do business, that someone wants to do business with. But we are not able to go annex unless we're asked.
Okay.
But we could grow, say, there could be someone, take, Redbird Meadows. They'll be coming to us in a few, in a month or two, or, whatever the process is, or where they are. They'll be asking us to annex them into the city. And when we do that, our ETJ automatically gets bigger, so you can wind up in somebody's ETJ whether you want to be or not. Because our ETJ automatically goes half a mile out from our city boundary. So that city boundary moves, so does that ETJ.
So does it overlap into Conroe?
It can never overlap once. So whoever's first, that's their ETJ. So we're blocked out on the east, on the north, and a couple annexations away from them kind of coming around. So we're, that's by the Carlisles, the family that owns the land outside the loop, and they own Bethel Labs up on 1097. They asked us a couple of years ago if we would accept them into our ETJ, not the city limit, just the ETJ, specifically because they didn't want to wind up in Conroe's.
So we're blocked from the north?
They come around, they come around all the way to Vintage Oaks. The most eastern lot in Vintage Oaks on
Conroe's
ETJ
No.
is on the north side of the city.
No way.
Yeah,
Yes.
promise.
Oh.
It's right here. And because the size of their city, they get 5 miles, not half a mile. They get 5 miles worth of ETJ, not just half a mile of ETJ.
So the reason that I asked is because that land next to the high school that you said is for sale, it seems like it would be a perfect property for the city to acquire for like a future water plant site, but,
That's what I was thinking.
yeah.
There's certainly lots and lots of options out there. And again, this kind of became a postage stamp out there when, again, kind of the landowners at the time and everybody reasonably thinking thought, so you're going to do a commercial development out there, sounds reasonable. Nobody's going to run the water plant right here. You got the school on one side, got some office warehouse stuff on the other side. Well, now we got something a little different.
So north, those property owners know.
He's
this
real
has been
concerned about
here.
north.
Those property owners know, basically, they're at some point.
At risk.
Now, can they ask us,
They could ask us to be in our ETJ.
even though they're already in Conroe's?
No,
They're locked.
once you get into Conroe's ETJ, the only way to get out is through a couple expensive maneuvers that involve you being in a mud district that's split between two jurisdictions.
And they had no say-so on that.
Right. So I talked with Matt Fuller,
Wow.
who lives in Vintage Oaks up there. And Matt has asked me several times, of course, he's a little busy, I think, to wrangle his HOA, but he's tried to get his neighborhood interested in asking to be inside our ETJ, simply because the only other option is Conroe, and they know it's coming. Eventually someone else is going to ask to be inside Conroe, and it's going to involve utilities, and it's going to be...
Yeah, that's why they got septic tanks back there. Because I went through there recently, they're doing another phase now, a new one.
Yeah.
But there's no city water, it's all septic.
Let's go to lunch anytime, I'll give you my whole.
Yeah.
But to the point, I'll just add, on improving the dynamic, I want you guys to know that I heard, and I'm going to be following up with some emails to try and talk about some ways to do this, because I think it's a good opportunity for us. I think it's needed, and I think it's just something that, since I've been involved with the city, there was never really the crossover. And it's hard, it's on staff to do, and we're human. But again, it goes back to big ideas and big conversations, and those are tough to sometimes get. But the attendance now with these meetings being online, it's a lot easier for elected and appointed folks to kind of cross-pollinate on some of the items, because you don't actually have to go sit in a meeting to hear it. You can watch it, although we always like them to. So please email.
I would also recommend, and not that it's my opinion to recommend at this point, but that when we talk about doing a council retreat coming in May that we talked about doing, that we talk about inviting P&Z and MEDC, because then that brings all of us to the table, because we all have to work together and figure out how to communicate, because if you're deciding something here and we're talking about it there, and we don't know what your conversation was, then we're not all playing, we're literally playing 3 separate puzzles, and we need our puzzles to meld together so that we can be stronger together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hey, Dave, I mentioned this many years ago. When the rezoning, and you sent it out to people within 200 feet, okay? Rezoning, to me, affects the whole community. And if people 300 feet away does not get that letter, they have no idea what's going on within 100 feet of, okay? City of Prosper, when they have a rezoning issue come up, they put a sign in that piece of property stating what it is. That way the whole community knows what's going on.
Kind of like the TABC posting when somebody's applied for an alcohol.
Well, yeah, exactly.
I know I don't know the exact requirements why some cities, seem like they do that because they're required to, because candidly those things are probably not inexpensive to do.
Right.
But there are thresholds, but something like that, there would be nothing to stop us from doing that.
Right.
I can say I don't like the law the piece of the law that requires us to publish a legal notice in the official newspaper of record for the city, only because I can only imagine how many folks that would.
Well, that's, yeah, that's, you know.
It's a legal notice in the Conroe Courier. I do not know the last time I looked at that for information that affected my neighborhood.
But, you know, there may be something important coming up rezoning that it may not, I mean, it may affect you, but you're not getting that notice.
But Dave, isn't that state law? The legal posting in the newspaper?
In the
So
paper.
aside from being like, that's something that we need to talk to our legislators to change the state law, because we can't control that even at the city level. We have to obey, I mean, the times they are changing, we need to.
Right.
Like you said, there may be, this small the city, it may
There
not,
are ways that we can
may not,
increase our, I think there's ways that we can increase our reach. There's nothing wrong with going above and beyond what's required, certainly.
because, you know, we're always talking about getting this, more and more people involved in meetings like this. Well, if you don't know what's on the agenda, other than getting on the computer and looking at the agenda, but if you're going down the street and you're seeing a 4x4 sign saying this is going to be zoned from, residential commercial or vice versa, you're going to be thinking, wow, this is,
Yeah, I should pay attention to that.
yeah,
But certainly if we can reach more people, that's the goal.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Procedure
and-
issue being the sign ordinances. Because otherwise, then everybody can stick a 4x4 sign in their yard. It sounds like a great idea, but our sign ordinances are gonna.
Yeah, those,
Well, I mean,
those temporary ones.
it has to be city posted.
Yeah.
so we require them to.
Just saying, Bill. I said, just saying, sorry, we don't.
I know that people take it, I mean, any way to take advantage of anything.
I know.
Well, yeah, I think, Julie, you're right on, but one reason we all got involved is we want quality of life, and that should be the goal. That's the goal.
Yeah.
And even with 50-foot lots, I mean, part of it, but my point simply is anything we can do to screen these developers and to try to bring in the ones that do it right. You can even do a small lot if you do it correctly, so it doesn't look like a track,
But I moved out here from Spring on a 40-foot by 80-foot lot, to a 10-acre home site.
Yeah.
It's a 9-day difference. I moved out here, like Allison said, for quality of life. It wasn't because I needed another rubber stamp subdivision.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. That's why we
There's
like-
lots of those in Conroe.
Yeah, and Willis. And, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And you can get your trailer right down the road from Dobbins, so.
And if we do it right, variance shouldn't be a bad word. There is a reason that somebody maybe didn't see down the road, so if we don't abuse it, then it's a good thing. But let's not abuse it. And I know that's what you're
It's expected and just part of the process, keep part of it, that's when we start to, that's when we, run into an issue when it seems to be the rule and not the exception.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just that.
I would like to know that in Hills of Town Creek specifically and in Buffalo Springs, that where they're getting these variances, that they're required to give compensating green space. So it does go back to quality of life and compensating green space, whether it's a walking trail or a community park or a splash pad. Those are things being built into these communities.
Yeah, but a lot of times it's land that they can't build on anyhow.
I know,
Right.
I agree completely there.
Oh, yeah.
Like the one up here on 140.
Exactly.
We've got some designated green space.
Oh, yeah.
So, based on the terrain that nobody can build on in our subdivision, I mean, that kind of polices itself, but, they lend themselves to good soccer fields if, if anybody ever wanted to develop them that way. But, the property owners are, trying to sell their lots and, hoping that somebody's willing to do all the dirt work for it. So, but, if we have a balanced approach on variances, and as you say, council and P&Z and MEDC and everybody's on, an open communication, open dialogue about what that is. And there's a plan in place by city staff, that's more of a formula for success, as opposed to the cart leading the horse, and we wind up with,
We get what we get.
I don't
yes.
feel like between any of these boards or councils that any of us that are on these said, ooh, let me volunteer for that so that I can just go run where I was and cause problems. We all came here because we wanted to do better for our community. And we're all volunteers, and that's worth noting that we're self-sacrificing to do better for our communities. So kudos for you being here.
I move to adjourn. Thank you.
We have a motion.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned. Good meeting.